Chris Carter clenched his jaw as he marched into the Voxari flight simulator. The arrogant alien pilots would soon eat their smug dismissals when the retired Navy fighter jock showed them what real flying was all about. Humanity's first contact with the advanced avian Voxari had led to this moment. A friendly flying competition with the future of human-Voxari relations on the line, and Earth had sent their very best. Chris sized up his competition as he strapped in. The Voxari pilots preened their feathers, hollow bones light and eyesight sharp. They flew by the book, traditional and predictable. Typical rookies. None more so than Varys, the Voxari star pilot. Guy probably thought he was the second coming of Nemo, with the icy blues he shot Chris's way. "Prepare to be humiliated, human," Varys spat. "Your primitive flying is no match for Voxari precision and technology." Chris just smirked. They'd see about that. In the air, the only thing that mattered was grit, guts, and breaking every rule to get the job done. The Voxari were about to get schooled in flying human style. If he failed, humanity would be seen as weak, inferior, prey. If he succeeded, he'd win Earth and powerful new ally among the stars. All Chris had to do was fly like his life depended on it. Because it did. The lights flashed, the simulator hummed. Chris wrapped his hands around the controls and narrowed his eyes at the screen. Time to show these flappers how a real ace flies. Chris rolled into a tight spiral, the G-forces pressing him back into his seat. The Voxari ship responded beautifully, its sleek wings slicing through the air like a hot knife through butter. He grinned as he pushed the craft to its limits, feeling the thrum of the engines in his bones. The other pilots were good, no doubt about that, but they were too rigid, too by the book. They flew like they had sticks up their asses, never deviating from their standard maneuvers. But not Chris. He was a maverick, always had been. He flew on instinct, letting the ship become an extension of his body, and it was paying off. He could see it in the way the Voxari spectators leaned forward in their seats, their eyes wide with a mix of shock and awe. Some of them even cheered as he executed a particularly daring maneuver, much to the disapproval of the more traditional Voxari. Varys, on the other hand, looked like he was about to blow a gasket. The Voxari ace glared at Chris from across the tarmac, his feathers ruffled in irritation. "So you're cheating," Varys hissed as Chris climbed out of his ship. "You're disrespecting our traditions with your reckless flying." Chris just shrugged. "I'm not breaking any rules, am I? Your ships are capable of so much more than you're using them for. You're holding yourselves back." Varys sputtered in indignation, but before he could retort, one of the Voxari officials approached them. "We've reviewed the flight data," the official said, his tone neutral. "While unconventional, Carter's techniques do not violate any regulations. He may continue participating." Chris fought back a smirk as Varys's face fell. The Voxari ace stormed off, his feathers bristling with barely contained rage. As the competition progressed, Chris could feel the tension rising among the Voxari. Some of the younger pilots, intrigued by his unorthodox style, began to experiment with similar techniques when they thought no one was watching. But the older, more conservative Voxari were not happy. They saw Chris as a threat to their way of life, an upstart human who dared to challenge centuries of tradition. Even some of the spectators were divided. The younger Voxari cheered for Chris, thrilled by his daring maneuvers and the way he pushed the boundaries of what was possible. But the older generation grumbled and shook their heads, muttering about the decline of Voxari values. As the final stages of the competition approached, Chris knew he was in for the fight of his life. Varys was determined to put him in his place, to prove once and for all that the Voxari way was the only way. But Chris was just as determined. He knew that he was flying for more than just himself. He was flying for humanity, for the chance to prove that they deserved a place among the stars. He gripped the controls tighter, his jaw set with determination. It all came down to this. One final flight, one last chance to show the Voxari what humanity was made of. The engines roared to life, and Chris felt a grin spread across his face. Time to fly. Chris gripped the controls tighter as he stared at the simulated asteroid field sprawling out before him on the view screen. This was it. The final round. Time to put up or shut up. Next to him, Varys's sleek silver ship glinted under the bright hangar lights. The Voxari ace had a steely look of determination on his avian face. He clearly wanted to beat Chris badly and put the upstart human in his place once and for all. "I hope you're ready to eat my space dust," Varys squawked over the comms as they taxied to the starting line. Chris snorted. "Big talk from a bird brain. Let's see if you can back it up." The course lit up, asteroids swirling and twisting in a chaotic maelstrom ahead. Chris punched the thrusters and rocketed into the field, Varys right beside him. Immediately, Chris could tell this wasn't going to be easy. The asteroids were moving fast, constantly shifting and colliding. He juked and jinked, trying to slip through narrow gaps, but his ship felt sluggish, not quite as responsive as in the earlier rounds. Varys, on the other hand, was zipping along with practiced ease, his traditional Voxari technique serving him well as he gracefully carved a path through the tumbling rocks. Within seconds, he had pulled ahead, leaving Chris in the proverbial dust. "Damn it!" Chris growled, wrestling with the controls. His sensors screamed a warning and he banked hard but not fast enough. His starboard wing clipped a speeding asteroid, sending him into a wild spin. Alarms blared as the simulator registered the hit. Shield strength plummeting, virtual hull breaches, the works. He was dead in the water. Through the cockpit glass, Chris saw Varys speeding off into the distance, weaving through the asteroids like he was born to do it. The Voxari didn't even spare him a backwards glance. Chris pounded a fist on the console. Was this how it was going to end? All his big talk, all his unorthodox moves, just to fail when it mattered most? He had two choices: throw in the towel and let Varys win, or do something crazy. Chris stabbed at the controls, rerouting power from shields and weapons into engines and maneuvering thrusters. The computer squawked in protest at the unconventional configuration, but he overrode it. He was going to fly this bucket of bolts like it was meant to be flown. No more playing by the Voxari's rules. The ship shuddered as the engines roared to new life, vibrating his teeth. The RCS thrusters pulsed rapidly, giving him ultra-responsive handling. He was a flying brick with no shields and no guns, but he was a damn nimble flying brick. Chris hurled his ship into a tight spin around a tumbling asteroid, then slingshotted off its gravity well to shoot through a narrow gap in the rocks. G-forces crushed him back into his seat as he pushed the inertial compensators to their limits. The asteroids became his allies now, cover and concealment as he used their mass to radically alter his direction and bleed speed in physics-defying ways. His whole ship groaned under the strain of the wild maneuvers, but it held together. And slowly but surely he began to gain ground on Varys. The Voxari was good, no doubt, but he was predictable. He relied too much on his ship's superior technology and his own conventional skills. Against this unorthodox new threat, he didn't seem to know quite how to respond. "Eat this, Featherface," Chris whooped as he boost-skipped off an asteroid and swept right over Varys's canopy, close enough to make the Voxari flinch. The crowd gasped and hollered. They were neck and neck now as they roared into the final stretch, ships jinking and juking around each other, missing, colliding by mere meters. Both pilots strained against G-forces as they pushed themselves to the ragged edge. Chris eyed a monster asteroid looming ahead, an idea sparking. It was crazy, it was stupid, it was probably suicide. So naturally, he was going to try it. He firewalled the thrusters and shot towards the massive rock, aiming for the very edge of its gravity well. At the last second, he cut power and let the asteroid's pull slingshot him around in a dizzyingly tight turn, his vision graying out at the edges. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked like he'd miscalculated and was going to paste his ship across the asteroid's surface. But then he was past it, hurtling towards the finish line like a railgun round, Varys struggling to catch up. It was going to be close, too close. The whole audience watched in breathless silence as the two ships rocketed closer and closer to the line, Chris's cobbled-together brick of a ship still clinging to a razor-thin lead. The crowd erupted in a cacophony of cheers and shocked gasps as Chris's battered ship nosed across the finish line, bare meters ahead of Varys's sleek racer. The silver Voxari craft flashed past an instant later, so close Chris could practically feel the heat of its engines. For a moment he just sat there panting, scarcely believing it. He'd done it. He'd actually beaten Varys, beaten the best pilot the Voxari had to offer, using moves that they'd never even dreamed of. A slow grin spread across his face as the magnitude of his victory sank in. He'd shown the galaxy what humanity was capable of, shown them that sometimes you had to break the rules and forge your own path to come out on top. He popped the cockpit canopy and clambered out, his legs wobbly from the brutal G-forces. The hangar was in chaos, Voxari spectators chirping and squawking excitedly, some cheering, others gesticulating angrily. The judges huddled together, reviewing flight telemetry on their datapads, trilling in agitated tones. Varys stood off to the side, his feathers practically vibrating with barely contained rage as he glared daggers at Chris. After what felt like an eternity, the head judge stepped forward, raising a wing for silence. The hangar fell quiet, every eye fixed on the robed Voxari. After careful analysis, the judge began, his voice echoing in the sudden stillness, we have confirmed the results. The victor of this competition by a margin of 2.37 seconds is Chris Carter of Earth. The hangar exploded into a fresh round of cheers and jeers, the cacophony almost deafening. Chris felt a rush of elation, grinning so hard his cheeks hurt. He'd done it. He'd really done it. But his victory celebration was cut short as a trio of imposing Voxari, wearing the sashes of the Prime Minister's personal guard, pushed through the crowd. The leader, a grizzled old bird with a wicked scar down his beak, clicked his talons at Chris. You human, come with us. The Prime Minister wishes to speak with you immediately. Chris blinked, glancing around uncertainly. This was unexpected. What could the Voxari leader want with a lowly human pilot? But the guard's expressions brooked no argument. Shrugging, he fell into step behind them, ignoring the curious stares and mutters of the crowd as they escorted him out of the hangar. Varys's eyes bored into his back like laser beams, promising retribution. The guards led him through a maze of corridors, past sentry drones and security checkpoints, deeper into the heart of the Voxari government complex than any human had likely ever been. Chris felt a prickle of unease. Something big was going on here. Finally, they arrived at a grand set of double doors emblazoned with the Voxari crest. The guards ushered him inside, into a vast vaulted chamber dominated by a massive holographic star map. And there, perched on a floating dais in the center of it all, was the Prime Minister himself. Christopher Carter, the Prime Minister trilled, his voice resonant and commanding. Congratulations on your victory. It was a most impressive display. Please join me. Chris stepped forward hesitantly, trying not to gawk at the sheer alienness of his surroundings. The doors boomed shut behind him, leaving him alone with the most powerful Voxari in the galaxy. Thank you, Prime Minister, he said carefully, inclining his head in what he hoped was a respectful gesture. It was an honor to fly against your people's best. The Prime Minister waved a dismissive wing. You are too modest, Mr. Carter. What you achieved today was far more than a simple race victory. You have shown us that perhaps there is another way, a better way. Chris frowned, not quite understanding. The Prime Minister sighed, his crest drooping. The truth is, Mr. Carter, the Voxari are in crisis. For months now we have been under assault by the Zorgons, a vicious spacefaring race hell-bent on our destruction. Their technology is advanced, their tactics unconventional and ruthless. Our fleets have been ravaged, our colonies laid waste. We are losing this war. Chris's eyes widened in shock. The Voxari were known as one of the galaxy's most powerful races. The idea of them losing a war was almost unthinkable. The Prime Minister leaned forward, his gaze intense. But you, Mr. Carter, you may be the key to our salvation. your unorthodox piloting skills, your ability to adapt and innovate in the heat of battle. This is exactly what we need to turn the tide against the Zorgons." Chris swallowed hard, his mouth suddenly dry. "What are you saying, Prime Minister?" "I am asking you to stay here on Voxari, to train a new generation of our pilots in your techniques, to help us develop new tactics and strategies to counter the Zorgon threat. The fate of my people may very well rest in your hands, Christopher Carter." Chris rocked back on his heels, his mind reeling. This was huge, an incredible honor and an incredible responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity to make a real difference, to save lives on a galactic scale. He squared his shoulders, meeting the Prime Minister's gaze steadily. "I accept, Prime Minister. I'll do whatever I can to help." The Prime Minister trilled in relief, his feathers smoothing. "Thank you, Mr. Carter. You may well have just saved us all." But even as they clasped hands, or hand and wing as it were, Chris knew this wouldn't be easy. He could already imagine the resistance he'd face from hardliners like Varys, the outcry from traditionalists who saw his involvement as a betrayal of Voxari ways. And looming over it all, the spectre of the Zorgons drawing ever closer, their shadow falling across the galaxy. As he left the Prime Minister's chamber, head spinning with plans and possibilities, Chris couldn't shake the feeling that his greatest challenges were still ahead of him. But he'd be damned if he was going to shy away from them. He was Christopher fucking Carter, the best pilot Earth had ever produced, and he was going to show the Voxari, the Zorgons, and the whole damn universe what that meant. Game on. The alarms blared through the cockpit as Chris rolled his ship hard to port, narrowly avoiding a barrage of energy blasts from the Zorgon fighters. All around him, the void of space was lit up with explosions and crisscrossing laser fire as the Voxari defense fleet clashed with the invading Zorgon armada. "Raven leader to all wings, form up on me," Chris barked into his comm, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Remember your training. Use the asteroids for cover and hit them hard on the flanks." A chorus of acknowledgements came back, the voices of his Voxari wingmates filled with a mix of determination and fear. They were all too aware of the stakes. If the Zorgons broke through here, the Voxari homeworld would be left defenseless. Chris led his squadron in a dizzying series of maneuvers, weaving between the tumbling rocks of the asteroid field that surrounded the planet. The Zorgon ships, with their rigid formations and predictable tactics, struggled to follow. "Now!" Chris shouted as they rounded a particularly large asteroid. "All ships break and attack!" The Voxari fighters split apart like a flock of startled birds, each one diving towards the exposed flanks of the Zorgon fleet. Chris felt a fierce grin stretch across his face as he watched the enemy ships scramble to respond, their neat lines thrown into disarray. "Their shields are down on the starboard side." Varys's voice crackled over the comm. Chris glanced to his right and saw the other pilot squadron swooping in, their weapons blazing. "Hit them now." Chris didn't need to be told twice. He yanked his control stick, sending his ship into a spiraling dive towards the weakened Zorgon cruiser. His lasers stitched a burning line across its hull before he pulled up sharply, the G-forces crushing him back into his seat. Behind him, the cruiser exploded in a brilliant fireball, the shockwave buffeting his ship. Cheers erupted over the comm as the Voxari pilots saw their foe vanquished. But the celebration was short-lived. A new contact appeared on Chris's radar, a massive blip that dwarfed anything he'd seen before. He felt his blood run cold as he realized what it was. "Zorgon Dreadnought," he shouted into the comm. "All ships evasive maneuvers." The monstrous ship loomed into view, its hull bristling with weapons emplacements. It dwarfed the Voxari fighters, making them look like gnats buzzing around a giant, and then it opened fire. A beam of incandescent energy lanced out from the Dreadnought's prow, carving a path of destruction through the Voxari fleet. Ships exploded left and right, their hulls melting under the onslaught. Chris watched in horror as one of the defense platforms guarding the planet was hit, the massive structure crumbling and burning as it fell towards the surface. "If I have to take that thing out," Varys cried, his voice filled with equal parts anger and desperation, "if it gets in range of the cities—" Chris nodded grimly, his mind racing. The dreadnought was too heavily armored for their fighters to damage. They'd run out of ammunition long before they punched through its hull. But maybe there was another way. "Varys, do you see that exhaust port on the rear of the ship?" he asked, an idea forming. There was a pause, then Varys's voice came back, tight with understanding. A direct hit might cause a chain reaction in the power core. But Chris, the approach would be a killing field. Their point defense guns would tear us apart. "Not if we give them something else to shoot at," Chris said, his resolve hardening. "I'll make a run for the port. You and your squadron keep those guns busy." "Chris, that's suicide," Varys protested. But there was a note of grim acceptance in his voice. He knew as well as Chris did that they were out of options. Chris swallowed hard, his hands tightening on the controls. "Varys, it's been an honor flying with you. Give 'em hell." "I'll see you on the other side, my friend," Varys replied softly. Then his voice hardened. "All ships on me. Let's show these Zorgon bastards what Voxari pilots are made of." Chris watched as Varys' squadron streaked towards the dreadnought, their weapons blazing. The point defense guns swiveled to track them, spitting streams of tracer fire. One by one, the Voxari ships winked out, consumed by the storm of fire. But they bought Chris the time he needed. With a wordless yell of defiance, he slammed his throttle forward, rocketing towards the dreadnought's rear. Laser blasts filled his vision, his shields flaring as they absorbed the hits. Alarms screamed in his ears, warning of imminent hull breach. He ignored them all. His focus narrowed to that one tiny exhaust port. Time seemed to slow as he lined up the shot, his thumb hovering over the trigger. One chance, one shot. He fired. The proton torpedo leapt from his ship, a lance of blue-white light that streaked towards the dreadnought. For a heart-stopping moment, it looked like it might miss. Then it struck home, vanishing into the depths of the exhaust port. A heartbeat passed, then another. And then the dreadnought exploded. Chris's fighter was tossed end over end by the shockwave, his vision graying out as the G-forces slammed him against his restraints. When he finally regained control, he found himself drifting in a field of debris, the remnants of the once mighty Zorgon warship. "Varys?" he called hoarsely into the calm. "Varys, do you read me?" Only static answered him. With a sinking feeling in his gut, he swept his gaze over the battlefield, searching for any sign of his friend's ship. He found it, or rather what was left of it. Varys's fighter was a shattered wreck, its wings shorn off and its hull blackened by laser fire. As Chris watched, it began to drift towards the planet, caught in the inexorable pull of gravity. "No," he whispered, his heart clenching. "Varys—" But there was no time to grieve. The remaining Zorgon ships were in full retreat, fleeing before the vengeful guns of the Voxari fleet. The battle was won. But the cost— Hours later, Chris stood before the Voxari Prime Minister, his flight suit still stained with sweat and blood. Around him, the other surviving pilots stood in respectful silence, their expressions somber. "Christopher Carter," the Prime Minister began, his voice heavy with emotion, "Varys, and all the brave pilots who gave their lives today. We owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Chris shook his head, his throat tight. "We did what had to be done, Prime Minister. Varys, he knew the risks we all did." The Prime Minister nodded solemnly. "His sacrifice will not be forgotten, nor will yours. You have shown us the power of innovation, of adapting to meet new challenges. The Voxari will remember this lesson." He turned to address the assembled pilots. "From this day forward, we will honor the memory of those who fell by incorporating their techniques into our own, by forging a new path, one that combines the best of our traditions with the ingenuity of our allies." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. Chris felt a surge of emotion, pride, grief, humility. Varys's death weighed heavily on him, a burden he knew he would carry for the rest of his days. But he also knew that Varys would not have wanted him to wallow in sorrow. He would have wanted Chris to keep fighting, to use his skills and knowledge to protect others, and that was exactly what Chris intended to do. As the Prime Minister droned on, Chris's thoughts turned to Earth, to the family and friends he had left behind. They would be proud of him, he knew, proud of what he had accomplished here, the lives he had saved. But they could never truly understand the price that had been paid, the bonds forged in the heat of battle, the sacrifices made in the name of a greater cause. Chris squared his shoulders, his jaw tightening with resolve. He would carry on for Varys and for all the brave souls who had given their lives. He would be the bridge between his people and the Voxari, an advocate for cooperation and understanding. Because in the end that was the only way forward, the only way to ensure that their sacrifices had not been in vain. The only way to keep the flame of hope alive in a galaxy filled with darkness. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.